Okay, so I want to say a massive welcome to Natalie. Thank you so much for being here. And we're in a coaching group together. And I think I put an advert on saying, has anyone experienced anything through their childhood that they think would, help parents moving forward? And you really kindly agreed to come on and speak to us, especially about the anxiety you've suffered over the years. And I think we were just having this conversation. I think especially throughout this time with the COVID period, anxiety plays a massive part of kids' lives. So do you want me to hand over to you and then we'll just go through some questions?
Yeah, okay. Where would you like me to start? How it sort of came about, or
Yeah, what was the earliest recollection, I can't say it, recollection of it you had?
of experiencing anxiety, or of knowing that I was experiencing anxiety,
Uh,
which
Whichever. Knowing, no, sort of, no, before you recognised it. So before
okay.
you realised what it was.
Okay, so before I realized what it was, probably when it started to become a real problem was in my early teens. So it's probably about 13 I was when I realized something that I was doing. I was starting to put coping mechanisms in place to deal with anxiety, even though I didn't really know what I was doing, because a lot of people in my family suffer with it and we all didn't know it. So it was normal in our house. So things like I would avoid answering the telephone if I didn't know who it was, for example. Um, I would actively avoid arguing with people for fear of humiliation and the anxiety building up to that. I'd need to know everything that was going to be said. So I'd play out conversations in my head as much as I could so that I could really get to grips with what might happen. So there was a lot of that. Then there was some health anxiety because sadly my brother died when I was 13, and then that and he died quite quickly. So he was diagnosed with bone cancer, which then died 6 months later.
Okay.
And so it all happened really quickly, and right at the beginning of when I started high school. So it was lots of change, lots of very painful feelings, and just a grief is such a difficult thing to deal with, that it all played into the anxiety that was already there. Yeah, and then I had quite a difficult relationship with my father as well. There was a lot of emotional abuse that went on, and that in itself also played in massively into the anxiety that I experienced throughout my childhood, but also then into my 20s.
So which do you think came first? Do you think you were aware of the emotional abuse which led to the anxiety, or do you think it was an anxiety that you were made to not feel good enough, or which one do you think came first?
Probably realizing that, because I always realized that there was emotional abuse. That was, I always knew. My mother has always said that this is very odd, that I've always had this deep rooted understanding that I shouldn't be treated a certain way. Even though I grew up in a household where emotional abuse was rife basically from the day I was born. So, but it just got a lot worse after my brother died. And so I think when I was in those teen years, and I started really pushing back on my parents and what they believed in, it dawned on me that this situation is not normal, and the dynamic that happens particularly between me and my father was really abnormal, and the things he'd say or do just weren't right and felt very wrong. So I think that's probably what it was that I noticed first, was the emotional abuse, but not realizing the effect it was having on my day-to-day life,
Yeah,
except perhaps for stress, because I definitely felt stressed.
because I was 13 would have been at the time of your exams as well at school, would it? Your
Oh,
SATs?
well, I grew up in South Africa, so it's all a bit different. But so you start high school, and I was a year younger than everyone else as well,
Right.
because I was born in the UK, and then I moved to South Africa when I was about 6, and because I'd already started school at 4 in the UK, I could already read, whereas most children didn't when they started school at 6 years old in South Africa. I was really bored, so they started me a little bit early so that I could just get going. So by the time I started high school, I was 12. My birthday's in January, and the school year runs from January to December. So I was 12 turning 13, whereas normally you're 13 turning 14.
Right.
Yeah, so I've forgotten what your question was again now.
No, I was just saying that answered it really. So just taking you back to, you said about the phone ringing, or you'd sort of play conversations in your head. Had something triggered that? Had you been humiliated, or you felt that sensation of frustration, you know, like when you're having a conversation, or were you bullied, or did it come from anything like that, or was it just a fear that was building in your head that you'd feel silly if you didn't know the answer? Does that make sense?
Well, all of the above, really. Yes. I mean, throughout primary school, I was bullied at school itself. I went to a very, very small school. There were 20 kids in my class, and there was only one class per year, so it was very small. And about half of those were girls, and all of the girls, apart from one, decided that they didn't like me. So I got ostracized, and so that went on for the whole of primary school. So in that respect, there was bullying going on at school, and then when I would come home, there was bullying by my father. So it was just, I mean, it was kind of normal to me in the sense that although it was painful and difficult, it was there all the time. There was just no escape from it. So yes, there's the bullying, and then the humiliation sort of came a little bit later when I was in my teens, when I would have arguments with my father and about something or other, usually of something I wanted to do, like go out with friends or just to go and have a sleepover at a friend's house or something, very normal things. And what he would do is say no and come up with what I felt was kind of a ridiculous argument for why not. And then I would say something to respond to it, and he would then laugh at me because I was getting visibly upset, and I would cry, and then he'd laugh and point and say, "What are you crying for?" You know, things like that. So there's definitely that aspect of humiliation there. So I think that's come from that. That's certainly the stem of the telephone issue, because he's got a thing about communication as well. So, you know, if certainly as I grew older and he left home after my mum and he split, you know, not knowing who was going to be on the other end of the phone was a bit of a problem. So because if he rang, I wouldn't know if it was him, wouldn't want to talk to him necessarily. So yeah. Did
your mum know what was going on?
Yes, but she was also being abused. So yeah, wasn't until I was nearly 16. This is a bit of a complicated story, but to try and mend things, my father bought her 2 tickets to go to South America, which is something she'd always wanted to do, and said, pick anyone you want. And she decided she was going to pick me, which was much to my surprise. So we went away to South America together for 2 weeks, the December before I turned 16. And I had already made the decision that I was going to leave home as soon as I could. So that would be when I was 16, I'd be allowed to, but legally. And I wasn't going to tell my parents about it. I was just going to go. I didn't know where I was going to go, what I was going to do, but I just needed to get out. And so while we were away, there'd been an incident the night before we left that kind of was the catalyst to our talking very frankly with one another. And I told her about something that I didn't really understand at the time. I thought it was like a daydream, but now I realize that it was actually a flashback from post-traumatic stress, because I'd never heard that term before. That's how I described it, as a daydream. But actually I had a memory of being sexually abused by my father when I was quite young. And because of what I knew about him, or at least what he put himself out to the community as a upstanding member of the community, he was a Catholic, you know, went to church 3 times a week. It was all very contradicting, so I didn't understand why I had this imagery in my mind. And she actually was she was really truly horrified, and said, and I told her then that I had decided I'm going to leave because I can't live at home anymore. It's too painful. And she said, well, you won't have to, because I'm going to leave him. So the following year in January, she said, as soon as we have our next argument, which won't take long, he's out. And she followed through, and that's what happened. That's how we got to some kind of recovery.
I was going to say, do you think that decision saved your relationship with your mother? Absolutely.
We are very, very close now, and I don't think we would be if we hadn't had that conversation, because I also had no idea what was going on behind closed doors with her, which is when all that came out as well. And she told me, well, I really did try, but every time something awful would happen with me too. So, now that I was coming out with all of this, it was a massive leap in where we were going to go with our relationship. And thankfully that's survived it all.
It's quite interesting because you described it earlier as normal, even though you knew it wasn't normal. And I think for me, if you're being physically abused as a kid, you can kind of see it because you can't really hide the bruises, even with PE, getting changed and things like that. But I think emotional and sexual abuse is something that goes unnoticed so much. And the amount of people that just feel as though that's a normal childhood, that it's normal. I don't think people even realise sometimes that it's not normal. So I think, was there anything you look back now and think, I wish I'd have done that, or I wish I'd have tried to speak to my mum earlier, or was there anyone that you could have spoken to, teachers or family members?
Oh, no, definitely not. Perhaps maybe if I was here in the UK, because the culture is very different. In South Africa, the culture is very much sort of buck up and pull your socks up kind of thing. It's very, I kind of felt like everyone, I think because of the emotional abuse as well, because of that, I felt that if I had told someone really what was going on, that A, they wouldn't believe me because I wasn't 100% sure, and B, that it was kind of like they were all in on it. This is because of the normalizing of it. And when you try to explain emotional abuse, it can be very difficult because it's not so much about what is said, it's how it's said.
Yeah.
And the circumstances around what might have happened previously to the conversation or the argument that goes on. And it's a bit like telling somebody a story that from something that you've watched on TV or a movie that was extremely powerful with imagery. And it's not something that you can really always get across. So that was a big part of the difficulty. But then having said that, I do recall coming to school nearly every day with people expecting a new story from me about something that had happened at home. And my life often being described as an episode of Days of Our Lives.
Right.
So in that sense, it was kind of normalized because it was all made. I could see the ridiculousness of it, so I would tell the story in a kind of funny way. And that was certainly a coping strategy.
I was going to say, do you think that was your cathartic release, sort of having it so everyone knows, definitely. But nobody of authority really knows?
No, exactly. And I don't think I really felt I had anyone that I could really trust to go with, certainly in a position of authority with regards to it. I told friends about it, that it was all quite well known what was going on, but to talk to an adult, certainly even a teacher, just wasn't an option.
That's quite a scary thought though, because if you were talking to your friends, I would hope that if one of my kids' friends were talking about it at school, they would come home and tell me and I would do something about it. So, and I mean, I know it's probably a different time now and there's so many recording methods, but it does worry me how many kids, with you saying about emotional abuse, I think if you were to give some examples now, isolated incidents would seem quite petty. And it's like, really, is that really what you're talking about? But actually, you're completely right. It's the way it's said, it's the context it's said. And I guess it's just that build-up over years and years and years of little things.
Yeah, and the connotation behind things. Yeah, because one of the things that was often what my father would try to kind of, or whatever his belief was about me, was that I was a slut. And it couldn't have been further from the truth, really. But he would never say it overtly. It was always little nicks here and there of something that I'd done, perhaps something that I was wearing, until it all just kind of bubbled over. And one day there was an incident where he did actually say, "You look like a hooker." And I really didn't. I mean, I was wearing a long sleeve top and a 3/4 length skirt. So, it wasn't really what was in front of him. It was just a perception for whatever reason, and that he was putting onto me. So there's that, there's that aspect of emotional abuse. It's what the perpetrator believes about you, for whatever reason, and they want you to believe that about you, to belittle you and make you feel small.
Yeah, it's their control, isn't it? It's their way of making you feel bad, so they feel empowered and in control of the whole situation.
Yeah.
I think my question was, so when your father would say things like that to you and make you feel the way he did, and then when you talk about the anxiety, can you just explain that feeling that your body was experiencing or going through?
For me, anxiety manifested in feeling like a bird was trapped in my chest. So I would get heart palpitations a lot. I would get what I now know is panic attacks. And I would also get bad feelings. So if I was going out with friends or something, I'd suddenly say something like, "I have a really bad feeling about tonight." It was completely baseless, but it was just something that I was living with residually, I think. And sometimes something bad would happen and they'd all go, "Oh, you knew something bad was going to happen." And actually all it was my anxiety. And it reaffirmed all of that feeling for me, and not really addressing what was actually going on. So yeah, definitely that stuck in a cage, bird trying to get out feeling in the chest, and shaky hands. Sometimes feeling a bit nauseous would happen as well. And sweating is the other thing. And that still happens to me a lot, is excessive sweating, which is quite awful.
Only because I just want people to know, those kind of feelings that you get, because I think it's so hard, isn't it, to differentiate feelings. And I talk about the gut instinct a lot. I talk about, that people know something's going to happen, but they still go through with it anyway. You've got to trust your instinct and all the rest of it. So there is a massive, well, when is it that? When is it anxiety? When is it? It's kind of so many feelings that cross over so many platforms, I guess.
Yes,
trying to differentiate what you're experiencing. And I think sometimes I worry that we get into this, or especially for children at a young age, it's trying to just not block it, not put it into some kind of, this is what you've got for the rest of your life and you're never going to be able to cope with it.
Yeah.
Because I think you spoke about earlier, you found coping mechanisms and things like that.
Yeah.
How did you find them?
That's a good question. I suppose it was just, I think because there was such an extreme going on in my household in terms of belief systems, because my father was a Catholic and brought us all up very strictly Catholic, I was starting to break away from that and looking for something else out there. My community generally was very, very Christian. So I wasn't looking to that either. I just needed something else. So I think that there was a lot of exploration. Like I would read quite a lot about different cultures and religions and things like that. And it was a teacher at school that got us to do a project on it, and it really sparked my interest. And then that's when I started looking into these things and realizing there's different ways of being in the world. And I suppose and when I came across Buddhism, one of the things that I learned that I think it was Buddhism, they said that life is suffering, and that really resonated with me. And I thought, well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Feels like almost my whole life has been like that. And yet I feel like I don't have a right to talk about it because I'm not living in a gutter and poverty. So there was also, because of course there's a lot of very deep poverty in South Africa. So there's that, and I think that's probably where the culture of, get your chin up type of thing, it's not that bad, it could be worse thing, comes from. So I think that's maybe where it started, was kind of sort of breaking away from what I knew to find something else to help me cope, and looking at different cultures and effectively what they do and what they believe, to see what actually works for me there. And I think it was definitely that phrase that really got me thinking, life is suffering, and so if that's the case, then everyone's kind of experiencing some form of suffering, and so I can get through this.
That's quite interesting you say that about the poverty, and you don't feel as though you've got a right to speak about it, because the majority of domestic violence cases that I've dealt with over the 16 years as being a cop is predominantly affluent houses. That it does go unknown. And I think there's something like the stats show that it's happened, or something in the household has happened like 20 odd times before they make the call to the police.
Yeah.
Because for that fact, they think they've not got a right to report it, and they've not got a right to be even moaning about it, because they've got a roof over their head, they've got food on the table. Even though they kind of know it's a problem, it's kind of it's not socially accepted at that level.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. There's definitely an element to that, because although my father is quite wealthy, we didn't really feel it, because while being wealthy, he's also very stingy. So we went without things that we needed, like adequate number of clothing, and sometimes there wasn't enough food in the house and things like that. And it was all about control, really, at the end of it. But that's, and perhaps that also fed into the idea of I deserve more than this because I know it's there. And I don't know, but I can totally understand why that would be the statistic that you get quite a lot of.
So there's 4 types of main abuse, and you've been through at least 3 of them: sexual, neglect, emotional. And I think for me, and it's so important that we get stories like this out, because A, people don't even know it's happening to them sometimes. B, like you've already said, you don't feel as though you even deserve to talk about it. And C, I think it's a really difficult situation, because I think when I first joined the cops, and I think one of my first jobs I went to, I looked at the mum and said, how selfish are you? Why on earth would you put your kids through that? Like, when I've got kids, I will never, ever, ever let them experience that, because I just couldn't get my head around it. But then when you get talking to them, you can kind of see like that financial stability. They've got a house, like where would they go? Some couples have been married for so many years, and I think that's part of domestic violence. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's always male on females, it can be females on males, but I think that's part of the whole plan, to make them feel financially insecure and emotionally insecure, and then you get to a position you don't even feel as though you could leave. So I think it's really easy to, out from the outside looking in, saying, well, I just can't understand why you put your kids through that. But actually, when you look, sort of scratch into the problem, there's a lot more to it.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Do you feel as though you wish your mum would have left sooner?
I do, but I also understand why she didn't. Because I think at the time when it was happening to me, it hadn't even occurred to me that it would be happening to her too. I kind of put them together as the same person, and decided that they were both really awful, and I just didn't want to know. And it really was that holiday that we went on that changed all of that, because it gave me her perspective. I'd heard plenty of my father's perspective, so you know, by that time I could make the decision, I think, quite fairly. And yeah, I think I can understand why she stayed as long as she did, because I think they were married for 14 years before she finally felt she could do something about it. And it really was, I think, me saying to her that I think I've been sexually abused that broke the camel's back, was enough to just say enough.
Do you have any kind of relationship with your father now?
No, he's currently under police investigation for historical sexual abuse. So he's not actually allowed to contact me, which is wonderful.
Is that a report made by you, or is that other people?
Well, that was a report initially made by my older half-sister who had been abused by him. And then my mum said to her, you need to talk to Natalie. And she then spoke to me, and she said, so this has happened to you too? And I said, well, yes, I have a few memories of it happening. And then because we'd never talked about it before, we started talking about the things that we did remember and realised there were some similarities. And she wrote a letter to basically everyone that she had an email address for, and said that she was going to the police and she knows of at least one other person, didn't mention my name. But of course there were questions, and I had a few phone calls from family members asking if it was me. I'm not really sure why they suspected it was me, but they did. And yeah, so then I decided I was going to come out and say, yes.
This is probably a bit of a weird question, but when your stepsister said that to you, did it make you feel better? Did it make you feel, because you've said before, it was kind of like a vision, you weren't really sure whether it happened or not. Did it suddenly click and you think, well, yeah, it's reaffirmed your...
Yes, I think because there was an element to it which will make sense why it felt dreamlike, because in her experience, and also having lived with him at some point as an adult, she knew that he took sleeping tablets, and we realised that is possibly what was going on, is that we weren't fully conscious.
Right, okay.
When it was all happening. And he's had that on prescription for as long as we have ever known him.
So moving forward, do you feel as though when it all came out and you sort of dealt with it and you said, you know what, I'm taking the decision now, this is my life, I'm going to be in control of my life, did that help with your anxiety and depression, or is that going to be an ongoing battle? Or
I think it will. I don't know if battle is the word I would use, but I have accepted that it is part of me now. I think that unfortunately my emotional template, without having had, if there was no abuse, probably was on the spectrum of there being some anxiety anyway. But this is just kind of like any experience has just magnified it and made it a lot worse. So I think, yes, I accept that it's probably always going to be there, but it may get lesser over the years, and then there may be events in my life that trigger it again. But I think the most important thing is the empowerment of knowing what it is now and being able to give it a name and saying, okay, I'm experiencing these feelings, I know what to do now. I have a little test that I can do that I've been given by the doctor, to the PHQ-9 and the GA, I think it's a GAD something or other, for anxiety, and it tells me exactly where I am and how I'm really feeling, because you can really trick yourself into believing that you're not that bad. So I've got some tools now, I think, that help me to, in a healthy way, first of all, accept that it's there and it could come back. And also then, if and when it does, what to do and how to help myself.
So you as you are now, looking back on your anxious 13-year-old self, what would you now say to anyone who suffers anxiety at a young age? Or is there anything you wish you'd have done at that age to try and figure it out? Does that make sense? Because I know some kids in this group suffer anxiety and things like that. So is there anything they can do if they're not getting the help they want from the GPs and things?
Oh, that's a hard one. I would say I've done a course on how to deal with children's anxiety because of my own daughter's anxiety, and one of the biggest takeaways from it I found was doing things in baby steps. So because anxiety is often a symptom of a fear. So not always, but it can be. So for example, the telephone thing that I was having was a fear of the person on the other side humiliating me and making me feel awful, because I might not know the answer to something. So taking things in baby steps towards that would be what I'd suggest. So I could maybe use an example with my daughter. So she really struggles with, for example, when she's talking to a friend on FaceTime or whatever, and perhaps the phone call gets cut, she will immediately go into this thought process of, she doesn't like me, they don't want to talk to me anymore, they're not my friend. And all the anxiety will build up, she'll get really upset and she'll start to cry. And this will happen like that. So what I've then done with her, and I've just said, okay, just stop. And then immediately, it's because I've just used my hands as a gesture and said, stop. She then pays attention, and I'll say, right, now let's think about this. And I start going from the steps all the way up to what actually happened, and then further away from that. So we start by, could it have been that the internet cut out? Could it be that maybe her mum said, get off the iPad right now? Could it have been this? Could it have been that? Anything that wasn't necessarily in her control or her influence. If it wasn't that, and maybe it was something you said, just send her a message and take back the control and say, are you upset with me? Or did you hang up on me? I'm really upset that you did that. And immediately she'll calm down. So just taking her stepping stones towards the goal that you want them to reach, I think is probably the biggest takeaway I had from that. And I find it myself very helpful.
It's quite funny. Do you know Ant Middleton, who does SAS?
No.
Oh, he's so dreamy. I went to see him live, and he was talking about, he was an SAS soldier, so he was saying, when he's going to Afghanistan and stuff, he used something that's called a fear bubble, and I use it at work quite a lot, and it is that, just draw yourself a bubble of like 1 meter, 2 meters in front of you, and just deal with that. Then once you've dealt with that, go through to the next one and just deal with that. And we use it for exams and things like that, because there's no point thinking about 20 questions because your mind's not focused. So just deal with one question at a time and then move on to the next one. And I guess it's the same kind of principle, just breaking it down. And just, my daughter had it when she first started going to school, and it was kind of like, let's just get you to the bus stop, then get on the bus, then get to school, then get off the bus, and just break it down so her mind's not thinking about the whole day in one, because it just can't cope with it.
Exactly. That's exactly what we do. Yeah. And in fact, actually, because I used to be, I think because of the depression and anxiety, I struggled with anger as well. And I used to be quite a shouty parent, and then feel terribly guilty for having shouted at my children. It was actually my older one, because there's quite a big gap between them. And since the younger one was born, I haven't really been shouting anymore. But it's helped me with that. In helping her, it's helped me. So by allowing her some breathing space, it then allows me some breathing space. And then I go, oh, I'm actually not that angry about this. Let's address what's going on. And then I'll address it. And then I realize that all of the feelings of anger have dissipated. And so it was never really about that. It was more about my frustration of not being able to help her.
It's that massive chimp response, isn't it? Everyone has that chimp response and it has a trigger, but it's about just giving it time to switch to that rational brain, and then you can actually have a conversation about it and talk things through. Yeah. So although you sort of say I've got depression, anxiety, you clearly have good coping mechanisms in, because you've managed to build a successful business and sort of go on. And I think my fear sometimes is that when people, are boxed from an early age with anxiety, depression, or whatever they are, they feel as though they can't achieve anything, and that's that's going to define them and define their future, as opposed to you sitting there saying, no, I'm in control of this. I will
Yeah.
control when it happens. And if I know when it's coming on, so I know I can put it back in the box.
Yeah.
And you've gone on to carve a successful life for yourself, really, and your kids.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the key word there is control, because anxiety really is broken down, a feeling of being out of control. And actually, although it doesn't feel like it, you can decide to be in control. It doesn't feel like it in the time, and it takes time to build on that. But I think once you really decide and you've made that decision that you don't want this to be in control of you, you want to be in control of it, then you can achieve what it is that you want to achieve. And I do something a lot that my grandmother used to say, and that is throwing your hat over the fence. And I think it's really helpful with something like anxiety, is that, like when you put the little advert out there, I did hesitate a little because it's a video call. And there was that initial hesitation, but I just immediately went, no, I'm going to do it. And I just typed, and it took me, it was a split second, whereas 10 years ago, that would have taken me, I would have deliberated over that for about a day, about whether or not I was going to do it. And then I probably would have talked myself out of it. So, you know, as I say, that was something very useful as well from my dear Gran, to just throw your hat over the fence, make the decision that with baby steps as you get there.
I think it's a massive thing, because I think, especially making decisions and stuff, if you don't just make decisions and you start thinking about it, I think you can talk yourself out of anything. It's kind of like you just got to do it, go for it, and step out your comfort zone. My internet's going mad
exactly.
again. So, couple more things, then I'll let you go. So, to all the parents,
that's fine. Go ahead.
All the parents on here watching, if their children are struggling with anxiety, from a parent's point of view, like because you've kind of gone through it, I guess you kind of, do you think you're in a better place to guide your daughter?
I think, yeah, absolutely. Even though, strangely enough, it was my husband who said maybe it's because we didn't know what was going on with her, because she would describe all these physical symptoms and we'd think that she was ill, but she never was. He was the one who said, maybe it's anxiety. And then it just all went, of course, that's what it is. But yes, so, I think, yes, it did. I did definitely being able to understand that, because certainly for her, when we talk about her feelings, I can relate to them and tell her that I do really understand how it feels. And I think that comforts her.
Yeah, definitely. So I think a lot of parents struggle with how to even bring up the topic or how to talk about it. So is there a best way for them to actually talk about it or broach the subject? Or because sometimes I feel as though if you don't understand it, you can sometimes make it worse. If you kind of turn it into this catastrophic thing and sort of focus on it, it will then in turn make them focus on it more and feel as though they're doing something wrong. Or so what advice would you give for any parents that you feel as though their kids have got it?
I think if they're concerned that a child has got it, then perhaps try and talk to a healthcare professional about it first, because you can book an appointment for your child, but you go rather than your child and talk to your GP. So you can do that just to talk about it and see if they think that maybe there might be something to what you're concerned about. And then just arm yourself with information. Information is key. If you've never suffered with anxiety yourself, but it's extremely difficult to understand when someone else that you, even especially when you care about them deeply, like a child, to understand what they're going through, because it's so easy to say, but that's nothing to be worried about, because to them it's everything. It's not logical, it's not rational. So I think just the best thing I can say is to arm yourself with knowledge, read about anxiety, go to charities that specialize in anxiety. See if you can even talk to someone from Health in Mind, because they're really good with that sort of thing as well. And yeah, I think just arm yourself with knowledge and talk to your child gently and openly about it. try not to use labels too much. If you don't want to use the label anxiety with your child, that's fine. But just to help them to feel like they're not strange, they're not weird, that they're just experiencing a normal human emotion, and the reasons for why they're feeling that you may not know yet. You may never know, but more often than not, there is something behind the anxiety, and that is, I think, what you can help your child to feel like it's not a huge deal, that you can't even approach it. So in a sense, I don't want to say normalize it, because I don't want to make it sound like it's an okay thing to just live with, but in the sense of talking about it, normalize the talking about it, make it a normal conversation, treat it the same way you would if they had bronchitis and they'd never had bronchitis before. Talk to them about it and say, you're experiencing these feelings. Does it feel like this? Does it feel like that? Get them to associate and remember the feelings that they physically have when they experience anxiety, so that they too can then recognize when it's happening, because everyone will experience anxiety in a different way depending on what's causing it, or just depending on how they're put together. But yeah, I think just definitely talking about it and arming yourself with knowledge are the two things I would say can really help a relationship with you and your child if you are not suffering with anxiety yourself.
Yeah, and I think I remember when I first started school, there was sort of worried, or one of them was especially worried, and I bought a book called The Worry Book. And it's really good. It's such a good book, because it kind of teaches them that it is normal feelings, and this is kind of almost like mechanisms to cope with it at that point. And but in picture form, so it was quite easy to understand, because I think sometimes parents will have a tendency to just go into use big words and stuff that will just baffle kids. They're like, oh, I don't really know what you're saying to me, and then they're kind of worried about that as well. So I guess leave it to the experts, which is why I put the message on there as well, because I can talk about jobs that I've been to and everything, but I don't know firsthand, what some of the stuff like this and what you must have been through. I think you're an amazing person.
Thank you.
I really do. And I just think that it's such an important message to get out of there, because you summed it up for me. It was normal. It's not normal. But it's kind of like just making people realize that it's not normal to be belittled and humiliated, and because it has detrimental effects, even bullying, it really does have such an impact on people. So I think you're amazing to come through it, because there are a lot of people who will use it as an excuse all the time, and they can't do this and they can't do that because of this, whereas you've now, in fact, tell us a bit about your business.
Well, I'm a wedding stylist and designer, and I specialize in contemporary weddings that are inspired by love and nature. And the reason I actually went into it was because of my mental health, because as a child, I was very artistic. I always have been. It's something that I do lots of different kinds of art. I draw, I paint, I just create. It's very difficult to put it into a box, what I do, which is why I decided that wedding styling and design was probably the best thing, because I can do lots of different creating in that. But I was actually not allowed to do art and home economics in high school, when that was really my forte, because it cost more money. So I had to do maths and science, which is not my forte at all.
I think it's anyone's, is it?
And I nearly failed, but I didn't. I managed to get through it, and I still was able to get, if I wanted it, access to university. But I didn't go to university. I actually left, and I moved from South Africa, and I moved back to the UK, and I immediately started working in fashion, which is also a love of mine. I've made many wedding dresses and clothing for friends and family. And yeah, when I was engaged myself, I just had the brainwave of starting my own business, because I couldn't find what I wanted. I was like, this is not I don't understand. I can't find what I need. Everything's chair covers and organza, it's not me. I don't want it. So I thought, well, I'm going to take this opportunity and I'm going to just make my style and go with it. And that's where it all started. I just thought, no, this is it. This is what I can do. And it covers so much of my creativity. I'm just going to go and do it. And so I did.
That's a massive step though, isn't it? Like,
yeah,
massive. You should be so pleased.
Thank you.
So if anyone's looking at getting married, have you got a Facebook page?
I do. It's the Elysian Styling Company.
There you go. So if anyone's getting married.
Yeah.
Do you think that's saved you a little bit as well? Because you've got something to focus on and take your mind off it. So I guess if you're starting to feel as though something's triggering you, you can just go be creative and just escape.
Yes and no, because I find creativity for me comes in ebbs and flows. And sometimes when I'm going through depression, there can be a block there. So it can be really, really difficult to work through that and want to work, because that's quite common. And I think with anxiety as well, because you can kind of feel like you might be bouncing off the walls with all of this pain. You're not actually doing that, but you feel like you want to be, because your whole body is just wanting to escape. And so all you can focus on is the feeling you've got going on. But then other times I can use music in the background and it will take it all away while I'm working. So yeah,
I think it's about finding those escapes, isn't it? And just experimenting with it, because I think it's important to say as well that if you can recognize your triggers and have some coping strategies, they might not always work first time. It's about finding what fits for you and about what works. I think with anything like this, it's not a quick solution. It's going to be a continual process that goes on probably for the rest of your life.
Yes, yeah, and it'll be different. There'll be lesser times and there'll be bigger times when you're experiencing it. And it's because, life, it carries on. Things happen, events go on, and it's just about coping with all of those things. And one of the things that I suppose I do when I am being creative is it's remembering. Also, why one of the reasons I started that particular business is because I fundamentally believe in love, and how in a way it's a cure-all, because if we have love, then you have everything. And I've always believed that that relationships are the most important thing in life. That if you have no true deep relationships with people, you have nothing. And I've always believed that. And so I fall back on that. And I remember that one of the reasons that this business exists is because I believe so fundamentally in the feeling of love. And then I can move forward, and I hold on to that.
Well, that's an amazing lesson to finish on, especially with everyone moaning about being locked down and COVID and stuff like that, because actually, if you've got everyone that's happy and healthy, that's surely all that matters in life.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, Natalie. I really
You're very welcome. You're welcome.